It's one of the most common words you'll hear throughout watching sports, yet there's plenty of mystery around this elusive concept. Welcome to the sports psychology of. Today, we're talking about the sports psychology of momentum. Is it possible to get better at creating and sustaining momentum? What about stopping your opponents from gaining it? What is momentum exactly, and how can we use this knowledge to leverage more control over it? In today's episode, I'm joined by Mike Howard as we talk all things momentum. You'll hear answers to questions like, what is momentum? How can athletes, coaches, and teams improve their ability to gain and sustain momentum, as well as put a halt to opponents from doing the same? And what mental qualities are most relevant in momentum? Mike is a native Oregonian who currently lives in Hood River, Oregon. He received his master's degree in sports psychology from John F. Kennedy University and has a background in utilizing sport and performance psychology to not only enhance the performance and well-being of competitive athletes, but also to benefit underserved youth through life skills development in various urban and rural communities. Mike also has experience working with professional and collegiate athletes, as well as working as a performance and resilience enhancement specialist with the United States Army. Mike is also a registered certified mental performance consultant with the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy. All right, thank you so much for joining me, Mike, on the sports psychology of. Real quick, before we get into momentum, where does your love or appreciation for the mental side of sports come from?
Oh, great question, Gabe. I think I took it from a different avenue than most people I've talked to who get into sports psych. A lot of people I know have been really high performing athletes, and they've seen right away, the need for those skills because they've had to rely upon them. I was never that individual. I've always enjoyed sport to a pretty solid degree, and I participated in a lot of different things, but more individual sports than team sports, though I've dabbled in both. But I would say that my real love for it came when I was recognizing just how impactful it was for the development of youth, and specifically at-risk, underserved, underprivileged, under-resourced individuals who were not getting some of the skills that they needed in traditional ways. And I found that active engagement, experiential learning, recreation was selling them. And it was helping them develop life skills that really improved upon their opportunities. And when I recognized that there was something that tied all this together, the sports world, and that sports psychology existed, I wanted to know more about it. And that's really what got me to start focusing on it, not only just digging into general psychology, but being able to enhance into that very specialized sport and performance world. And now my practice is really well balanced. I not only do work with underserved populations and help construct life skill development programs, but I work with collegiate and professional athletes because I love to see the elite performance at the highest levels. And that also is true for the business world and the military and any other aspect where humans are trying to excel and be their best. So it was an interesting way to get into the field, I would say. But since then, I've really diversified and found just how awesome it is to be able to serve so many different groups and clients.
Yeah, when you say that these skills are basically life skills, it rings true to me because although we say this is the field of sports psychology, it's really performance psychology. And by performing, it doesn't even have to mean that you're an actor, musician, athlete. It could just be performing as a person, as a husband, as a student. So it's great that it ties all that stuff together. Let's talk about momentum. So before we get into it, what is momentum? This feels like a very abstract concept that maybe everybody talks about, but might find difficulty in defining. So do you have a definition of momentum, or maybe just a way to clarify what we're talking about?
Man, I'll give it my best because you are correct that the concept of momentum is out there in the world, and it's whatever the broadcaster said it was in the moment is kind of how it gets perceived. But in general, most of the time people are talking about psychological momentum and what is going on in the minds of individual or team athletes. And there's the physical aspect as well of just, tangible. Are you making headway? Are you moving down the field? Are you scoring more points or whatnot that you can kind of grasp and say, well, they've really taken control of this game, and the momentum is all there in that regard. But the psychological momentum is really where things break down into those smaller sub areas. And the way that I've always looked into it is linking the concept of momentum with synchronicity. And so I really start off by defining synchronicity first, most likely, because that is also one of those terms that people use in a lot of different ways right now. But I mean, even in courses, whether it's a synchronous course or an asynchronous course, and we're doing it, in person or online. But in general, the concept of synchronicity being that things are matching up and they are working in the same phase. They are working in unison, harmonized with one another. And when you start looking at how synchronicity plays into momentum, it is that understanding that you have a balance that is working for you versus working against you. And as you start to add more variables into that, it becomes increasingly more difficult. If you just have one individual who's trying to get their mind straight and, get all the leverage and the momentum working in their direction, that's a lot easier than trying to get a team of 11 or more all trying to go in the same direction. And so starting to focus on synchronicity and how that comes to be and what those perceptions can be when teams feel as though they're synchronous or not, whether they're working together and they're moving along accordingly. That is where, in my mind, momentum really starts to show itself, and you can see the tangible results play out. Where are these people all in unison? Or are they kind of at odds with one another and they're seemingly not able to maximize their output? The synergy, the parts or the sum is greater than the parts. You're able to really maximize and create more. The only time that 1 + 1 can equal 3. So that's how I start to look at momentum. It's not a real easy, clean definition for you, unfortunately, because it's not going to come across that way, but that's how I start to put them together and recognize what we can do with them.
Staying with that synchronicity aspect, how does that differ for an individual sport? So someone who's playing golf or tennis, because it makes total sense with a team. So like those 11 brains working together obviously creates momentum when they're in sync. But what does it look like in an individual athlete when they are either creating and sustaining momentum or they're losing momentum to their opponent?
So with an individual, I think it really plays down into the basic cognitive level of what you're trying to accomplish and where your thoughts are aligned. I'm not quite sure what research article I'd found it on, but I ask frequently how many thoughts people think that they have on average in a day. And people throw out answers all over the place. Like, we got 1,000, we got 10,000, we got 1,000,000 thoughts a day, that people have on average, except Fred over there, he gets about 3. Fred always gets ribbed, by their buddies. And like, he doesn't think very much. But in general, there was a study that came out of the University of Southern California's neuro imaging lab, and they found that on average, people have about 70,000 thoughts a day. And I always break that down to, I think it comes down to like 49 thoughts per minute. And I go, well, that's about a thought per second. And clearly you have some more than others. If it's a really high stress moment, you're going to be trying to pull in information from wherever you can get it. But if it's a downtime and you can like really become more mindful and you can like reduce and direct your thoughts, you're going to have fewer. So the individual is trying to juggle all of those components and variables at the same time. And the more that are outliers and can trip you up, the less likely you are to remain synchronous and to be able to create and control those opportunities for momentum swings.
Yeah, it makes sense that if you're going to be having a thought per second, so let's just say 60 thoughts per minute, if they are all over the place, where there's some positive, some negative, some effective for performance and some ineffective, that it's going to hurt your chances of gaining and sustaining momentum, as opposed to all of those thoughts being very universal, very uniform,
Yeah.
and on the same subject.
Yeah. And that's where you can see that it can still be just as difficult for the individual, because if they're left to their own devices, now I have to focus on me. But what happens if I'm working within a team? I'm playing automatically because I've built up to a certain level of execution, but I'm really now attending my focus to my teammate. And that might minimize or control some of my thoughts in a way that is productive as well. So it's not necessarily just easier because it's only me, individual versus team, but it's really having that understanding and awareness of what you can regulate and control, and then being able to align those and to create anything systemic enough that's going to help you produce the way that you want. Getting into a flow state is what's usually talked about in that regard.
And we're going to talk about flow state later on when we talk about a lot of different mental performance variables. Before that, I want to keep talking about momentum just a little bit. And I want to talk about the differences between short-term and long-term momentum. So this is how I think of it: as you could easily see momentum, for example, in basketball, when a team goes on a run where they score 10 points, the other team scores 0 points. That's momentum. But you can also see this throughout a series where maybe a team was down 3-1 in the series and they win 2 or 3 games in a row, and now they have this more long-term momentum. Is there anything you can speak of that would help us kind of clarify or understand the differences between these two types of momentum?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question again, Gabe. It's interesting because it can be so varied, that it can be hard to peg, and everybody wants to fill in the gaps Monday morning quarterback style. And so you're trying to give the best that you can, and the greater awareness that an individual or a team has, the more you can kind of pull from them in those moments to say, tell me what was happening or what's going on. But for the most part, you can start to break down periods of momentum shifts in different ways. One of those concepts is having a spark start, is what it's called, which is something big happens. It's kind of out of the norm. And that can be a change in momentum, the direction of where things are going, for the good or the bad. The other end of that is a breaking of momentum, your opponent's momentum in a sense. You recognize that they have a direction that they're working, and you're finding a way to interrupt that.
Yeah.
And reset kind of what's going on. But you can also have what you're speaking to in terms of a gradual momentum shift. So that can also be, either positive or negative. You're working towards, or it's working against you, but it draws itself out a little bit more. And so when you're talking about a micro versus macro scale, these things are always kind of occurring in a way that it's hard to say, like, well, what degree are we at? Well, we're on the macro side of the micro focus right now. It's in a game, but we're looking long term because we know there's a full series versus, there's just so much that can be added to that. But I think that as you start figuring out, first and foremost, well, we're here now. Are you present? What's the micro scale? What's going on in this individual game or during this period? You're starting to figure out what variables you can control and what you're doing with some of these shifts and what you are aware of happening. Is there a gradual shift? Is it going your direction? Or is it just tit for tat? You get to score, I get to score. Or do you understand when you get those breaks in momentum, those spark starts, or those you interrupt and impede what was happening in the other direction? Those things are what you start looking for on that smaller individual moment. And then you can extrapolate that. At the end of a game, you say, man, we took the first of the series. Okay, well, that allows me to breathe a little bit, or it allows me to take a different strategy or a different approach. And so now I can twist my variables up a little bit more, and I can take this macro scale and start saying, all right, this is gradual. I got to win, best of 4 or best of 7. I got to get the first 4. Well, I got the first one under my belt. So now gradually it's going my direction. How do I continue that process to get there when the other team is like, yo, before they get momentum and win a second one, and we're really behind 0-2, how do we break this up? How do we come in and throw a wrench in the system? We're going to have to change up our strategy and our technique to make that happen because, our game plan of being up 1-0, we can no longer abide by. And an interesting concept that I always think of that I believe pertains to both of these, as you're asking, is some research done on what's called negative facilitation and positive inhibition. And that concept is really when you get ahead, you let your foot off the gas a little bit. You're feeling good. You may be in a flow state. You may have everything working in the direction you want, but that automatic play leaves some room for somebody to get in and take you down a peg, to interrupt what's going on. If they can be aware and they can adjust their play to make that momentum shift happen. The positive inhibition is, okay, well, because things are going so great for me, I will, take it easy. We see it all the time in terms of, are you playing to win or are you playing not to lose? Where's your focus right now? The negative facilitation is the opposite end of that spectrum where you are behind. And so now you really have to whittle down and focus in on those variables and figure out what's going on so you can dial in what you need to do to break up that momentum and to shift things back again. It can be a pretty big swing when you're thinking about that negative facilitation versus positive inhibition, because the team in the lead lets off the gas. The team trying to come back is like really ramping it up again and, honing their focus. You can all of a sudden switch sides quickly. And man, we didn't expect after halftime that you were going to come out and, blow them out of the water. How did that happen? That was such a big momentum shift. Well, what variables were functioning there to really lead to something like that? So I look into that in both the micro and the macro level of, just because you're ahead, where are you still dialing in to make sure that you stay ahead or that you don't give up a big swing? We already know that you may have the time come where you're not gonna blow them out of the water and shut them down, nobody scores again kind of thing. But how do you make sure that you don't completely let the wheels fall off the wagon and that well, now we're completely out of control? So it's being able to moderate some of those things when those shifts happen.
I really love those phrases, negative facilitation. So that's when you're behind and you're going to ramp up your ability to focus and have the energy to come back. And then the other flip side of that is the positive inhibition, when things are going pretty well and you get a bit complacent and comfortable and you maybe get too automatic where you're not giving it your all anymore because of that comfort. That really paints a picture of something that I think has been abstract for me and a lot of listeners, that they're actually putting a phrase to something that's happening that we see a lot in sports. So, and I think that awareness is very important, because now we can ask, how can I be aware of my positive inhibition? And then what can I do to counteract that from me becoming too comfortable? And then on the flip side, maybe you can even go, I don't have the negative facilitation right now because we're not behind, but how can I play like I do? A lot of coaches will talk like that, like play with desperation is a popular term I hear a lot. And that kind of has that negative facilitation feel to it. So we're going to get to a lot of different variables that people can think about and train to have that negative facilitation mindset, even when things are going well. But before that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss your thesis, which was related to momentum. I know there's a lot that goes into it, so whatever you want to divulge, go ahead.
Okay. So I did do my graduate thesis on momentum and synchronicity, as we mentioned, and it was really on the perception that players take during periods of momentum shift. So going back to some of those gradual, like how many plays in a row did something succeed? Or did you have a spark start, or did you have a break? You had so many plays in a row going in your favor, and then there was a turnover, and things completely had this break in what would be perceived as a momentum shift. And that was tied in with the concept of synchronicity again, and how aligned athletes felt, and how connected, and how well they perceived to understand what the person to the left or right of them was doing. In this research, I ended up working with a high-performing rugby team. So it was a open skilled sport. I had done some work with American football as well and pulled in some data. I originally started with a closed skill sport. It starts and stops. Each play has a whistle. It has you get on the line again and you get ready to go. But I found that there's benefits in looking at both open and closed because of the fact when you're trying to dial in that perception of what your teammates are doing, it's how quickly you can reset and how quickly you can take that awareness again, as you were just saying, to the positive inhibition or the negative facilitation. If it's an open skilled sport, you just have to reset yourself when the play is always happening around you. If it's a close skilled sport, you get to get into the box and take a cut and, okay, take a step back and, wait for the pitcher to reset and go do it again. That almost gives you a little bit more of a chance to kind of, align everything you need to perform well. But when I was doing a lot of this research, it was very indicative of just how aligned teammates were with each other at high performing levels to recognize when momentum shifts were occurring based upon the fact that they could predict and they could generally align themselves with their teammates and what they expected to get from their teammates. Now, I'll try to conceptualize this as best as I could. Where I first got this idea of studying, I mean, we all are interested in momentum and how this all plays out, but I was really interested thinking about American football and how you have all of these individuals lining up and just throwing themselves at another group of individuals lined up and ready to roll. But I kind of perceived it in the manner of like a car engine. Now you have the pistons that are working in the engine to move the fuel and to get that combustion and to really produce that high horsepower of what's going on. Now each piston is moving in unison. They're not all up and down at the exact same time. But in my mind, I was thinking, how does this play out with a team? How are they all working together to make sure that they can oscillate at the same rhythm, the same frequency, in the same phase, and begin anticipating that the person to the left and right of them is also doing that, and that they can rely upon them to execute their job and not have to cover down for the person and whose job it is besides them. So in my mind, I was like, well, that's a great thought. That's where the variables come into play too. That one of the people to the left or right of you, or maybe yourself, gets an injury per se. And now can you keep playing or not? Maybe you're not at 100% anymore. So how are you oscillating with everybody else? Are you communicating the fact that you're not at 100%? What about the end of the game? What about overtime? You're clearly not with as much energy as you had beforehand when the game was just starting. So you're still matching up one side of the field versus the other side of the field, trying to maintain stamina, maintain energy, maintain that synchronicity and that oscillation of working back and forth and being able to overpower your opponent. Being able to pull those things together and start digging into variables, I think was really interesting, and seeing the differences between open sports skills and closed sports skills and getting people's perceptions of how that works in their world. Now, the last thing I'll say about that too is there are some of these naturally occurring moments of synchronicity that we see in society. If you've been down south before and you've gotten a chance to see some of those fireflies, you're out in a field and they kind of all start lighting up and glowing and doing their own thing. But it's really interesting physics wise because they will, for a moment there, all start to synchronize together and blink and glow at the exact same time. And then they kind of get out of sync. And as long as you're continuing to watch, eventually you see them come back into sync again, where it just like on, off, on, off. And then you have hundreds of them doing whatever they kind of do. It's an interesting concept that we see how synchronicity is in our natural world. When you put different metronomes together, they will find that moment to synchronize as well and then go back out of sync. So I believe that when looking at momentum and understanding these shifts and the tangible nature of them for winning or losing or gaining or whatever you're looking at. Understanding synchronicity and how things play together is what's really going to help you enhance that opportunity to be able to create momentum shifts and design the variables that get you to be in sync more often than out of sync.
Fascinating. Something I want to ask, is there a difference between synchronicity and alignment within a team?
That's a good question. I think of synchronicity as being, well, I think as alignment in my mind being more linear. Alignment is binary almost in a sense. Are you aligned? Yes or no? Closed ended. You could just ask over and over again, like, are you aligned now? Are you aligned now? Are you aligned now? And you're going to get a yes or a no. But synchronicity is more of a spectrum, which is to what degree are you aligned? And that is, you could equate to percentage almost. And so it's much more malleable or more organic, I would say, than the concept of just being aligned for the next task at hand.
It's almost like, are you aligned in the same goals? And then synchronicity is, are you doing the same things the same way to reach those goals?
Yeah. Yeah. Is everything that you've aligned blending? Is it merging well together to get you that output you want of those goals?
And then going back to your football example, which I feel like painted a really good picture in my mind, I got that trust and communication are just huge in creating and sustaining momentum because, again, trust is important to allow you to do your job as best as you can while not worrying about anybody else and being distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And then communication is a way to build that trust and understand how can we get as in sync as possible through communication.
Yeah, there are a lot of different variables, but I think you totally nailed two early on that are incredibly important. And over time, I've actually started to lump some of those in with some research I've seen on synergy before. And one of the big components there that kind of houses them all together is the concept or the variable of just having candor. And it's the ability to engage with somebody openly and in a trustworthy manner, and to be able to communicate whatever comes up in a way or to a degree that somebody can take it more tangibly and move with that information faster. If you trust somebody to a degree where their candor allows you to execute at a faster pace, you're going to align more quickly. You're going to be in sync faster, and that cohesion is really going to build. And that's where you get the synergy, right? That's where the two of us are actually going to produce more together than we could by ourselves alone.
Got it. Perfect. Let's transition into talking about more concrete, specific, either mental skills or mental factors that create mental performance in general. Where I want to start off is talking about how confidence relates to momentum. And when we talk about momentum, this is the idea of creating momentum, sustaining it, and also preventing other teams' momentum. And I feel like confidence is a great place to start because where my mind goes when I think of a team that has a lot of momentum is they just have a lot of confidence. And maybe that is because they trust one another or they trust themselves to do their job. Where do you go when thinking about how confidence relates to momentum?
So confidence, you're right, is a huge buffer for anything that we're trying to produce in a performing world. Uh, this goes back to that spectrum again. A lot of people look at confidence again binarily. They say, do you have it or don't you have it? And so people will sometimes bluster and, like, well, the arrogance, duh, of course I'm confident, and you could become cocky and overly confident. And it can really lead you down a bad path. But you're like, well, what are my options? I'm either confident or I'm not. But a better way in my mind, and the way that I really work with athletes or anyone performing, is confidence is on a spectrum. It's the degree of certainty you have that you can execute the task at hand in the manner of which you believe is what's necessary. And that means I can break it down into a percentage then. I can say, how confident are you right now? And you don't have to be yes or no, on or off. It doesn't have to be 0 or 100. It could be, I'm 65% confident. And I can work with that, and I can take variables out of that and add variables to it to take you from 60, 65, 70%. Let's bump you up to 80 or 85%. Because who doesn't want to be an extra 15 to 20% more confident? And so then all of a sudden you have control. And if you can take some of those variables and add control, then you are focusing on what you can do versus what you can't do. And it goes back to that negative facilitation again, in a sense. You are honing down to the base level of, geez, we're getting beat right now. What is it I can do to make progress? And then you have confidence to say, well, that worked. I should keep doing that. And then you start to build up that automaticity again, as we said, and you may get into a flow state and you may get a bigger swing to it. So confidence is really huge, but it really should be, in my mind, viewed as a degree of certainty to which you can execute that task, and not just a binary, you got it or you don't.
Do you think it's possible for a team or an individual to create and sustain momentum if they don't feel confident?
I'm probably, but I mean, I would assume that it's more fleeting than not, and it just wouldn't be held out in the same regard. It's that, even a blind squirrel can find a nut in the woods every now and then. I look at confidence as that buffer again for all performance, that I really incorporate that into any skills training I'm doing, or anything else. So in order to sustain momentum, I believe that you have to have a degree of confidence that you can control and you can put into play and you can really grasp onto. If you don't, then it may just be, well, they took their foot off the gas again and I got lucky. And so that's where you think you saw a momentum shift, but it was really just a fluke.
Yeah, I think a lot of that might be more common than people think, that there are flukes out there that might look like something that it's like, oh, he's playing with a lot of confidence, but it could have just been a low confident play that happened to work out. But let's move on to another mental quality, and that is resiliency. So the ability to bounce back from mistakes, persevere through adversity. This feels very relevant to staving off momentum from opponents.
Mm-hmm.
If someone gets in their own mind and thinks they're doomed because the other team is gaining momentum, that is obviously going to facilitate even more momentum for the opponent.
Yeah.
So what do you think about resiliency and the connection to momentum?
Yeah, you're right. The need to be resilient is high because you have to be ready for those swings and those shifts, and you have to mitigate what's happening. You are always looking to control what you can. If you're trying to get the momentum shift in your favor, you're trying to really be able to hone in on what works for you, play your game, and see you just overpower someone else. But you need to understand, if you trip up, if that fluke happens to you when you're winning, you're trying to avoid the positive inhibition. You're just ahead 3 or 4 scores, and you're like, man, well, I don't want to risk hurting myself or something like that. Okay, but what if you are just they came back, they recognized, and they were able to put one of those breaks into that gradual momentum that you had. Okay, but how do I stop them now? Like, before it gets out of hand, I need to understand what my coping mechanisms are, where my level of resilience is, to be able to navigate. So I can, as you were saying, I can find a way to go over, under, around, or through that barrier. I need to have the resilience necessary to then be able to say, okay, this isn't going to get out of control now. I'm not going to get in my own head. I'm not going to add too many more variables I can't control that are going to then completely derail what I was hoping for.
What I think of when I think about resiliency is getting to neutral, which was made famous by Trevor Moawad. So it's again that not being too emotional about that momentum shift and getting really negative and pessimistic, but getting neutral and objective and asking, okay, what's important now? What am I going to do about this? And getting that's the best chance of overcoming obstacles and momentum shifts. So good point there.
Yeah. Thinking about micro and macro again, real fast. I mean, that's where you see some of those teams that just say, look, we're blowing them out, but I can't let up. And I might get flack for it at the end of the game because, there's 30 seconds to go and you just punched in another touchdown. Like, what's going on? Or why did you pass? You're supposed to run the clock down, and you just like, come on, now you're just running up the score on us. But what's the alternative? You may have that huge swing come back again. So when you see these teams that just will not let up, Part of it could be in their DNA and their philosophy and how they structure and the resilience that they have to say, we just keep going. Every play is like last play. If it went badly, we flush it and we get ready for the next. If it went good, awesome. Do we get another play? Great. Let's make it the exact same. And so societal pressures come out there somewhere where then you got to talk to the media afterwards. You have to explain to the other team, parents like, whoa, why did your kids do that? You want us to teach them development skills to succeed. Well, these are the best ones you got. And sometimes it looks a little uglier than not.
It's a tactic to avoid being that embarrassing story of a miraculous comeback. Whereas no, you kept your foot on the gas. And although it might have been uncomfortable, you're not going to be embarrassed. But yeah, definitely have to do some explaining sometimes afterward. But let's move on to motivation. Where my mind goes is motivation is very high at this idea of creating momentum, because you have that confidence that you're going to achieve a goal of maybe winning or catching back up. And energy is a very big factor in momentum. And I feel like that stems from motivation. So where do you go in thinking about motivation and its ties to creating momentum?
Yeah. Whenever I think about motivation, I immediately go to self-determination theory with DC and Ryan. And anybody who hasn't heard of that before, it's a wonderful rabbit hole to dig into. And I would say that with that, the motivation has multiple facets to it. There is the autonomy component of I get to do what I want to do and be here and understand where I want to go. The confidence or the competency, how well can I execute and do what is expected of me and what I expect of myself? And how related am I? How well do I have trust and synchronicity and engagement with others and a degree of which I know it's all going to come together? When you can put those components all into play, you can really enhance that motivation of the ability to achieve. And so for motivation, I frequently dig into the autonomy component early on first. And I try to make sure people understand how multifaceted that is. And that, autonomy is I got to make this choice. I get to decide what I want to do. And if you look at DC and Ryan's work on where autonomy is on a spectrum, whether it be an external factor or an internal factor, and you dig into what those intrinsic components are, the things that are just natural to you, your core values and core beliefs, the things that say I am who I am and you're not stopping me. This is just how I live my life. If you can tap into those components, you can leverage, never ending energy, right? If you can figure out what it is that you value that motivates you, then you're going to dig deep even during those hard times. And you're going to have those bedrock values that you can say, this is a part of why I get up and I perform, why I execute. And teams try to work on that. You have philosophies, you have team values and goals and what we buy into. But think about the professional sporting world. You're on this team today, but what team are you on tomorrow? How quickly are you having to adhere to a different set of values or norms, that people are playing? Your role may still be the same. You're still expected to execute at this high level or, anchor this part of the team, but the way you get there is somewhat different. So you're trying to dance around those values that may be espoused by your organization, by your team, by whomever, but you're also trying to figure out what's internal to you, what is intrinsic in your world that will never change no matter what team you go to or where you go. And if you can kind of put some of those into place, what you're going to find is that you have that never-ending source of energy. Now, everyone taps into it a little bit differently, but you're not going to be able to give it up. You're going to say, hard work, persistence, achievement, family. These are all values that are going to be me no matter where I am. And you can rely on me. You can trust me. And I'm going to be open with you to say that these are who I am. So expect it every time and lean on me. Leverage me. I leverage them. Now we bolster our resilience again. We bolster our communication and the confidence goes up. And then even when we're hurt, even when we're tired, I got your back because I've demonstrated that in the past, and the motivation remains high to play for the person to the left or right of you or even to trust yourself and say, this is an individual sport, but I can really focus in on why I'm doing this. Simon Sinek, that why is like really strong with me. That's what's going to help me drive on.
And that's a really good example of mental toughness in the athletes that are able to sustain that energy when it would be very difficult for a lot of people to sustain it. And they do so anyways, because they've done this training of becoming aware of their values. They have this self-determination theory, these components of motivation locked down. And also that beautifully comes back to your thesis when you talked about alignment and the relatedness component of self-determination theory and how important that is for momentum. Because if relatedness and being connected to your team and coaches is important for motivation, you can also see how that feeds into momentum, and having that increased motivation will improve the ability to create and sustain momentum and stave it off.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's talk about self-talk. And I think we kind of talked about this in resiliency as how you can be more objective and neutral rather than getting very negative. How else do you think it's relevant to talk about self-talk in the context of momentum?
Ooh. Well, I mean, mental skills are all about self-talk in so many ways. You're either taking a cognitive behavioral approach to it. My thoughts drive my actions, how I feel and what I do. Or you're jumping in with more of a mindfulness area, which is I'm trying to reduce my thoughts so that I have control, not control over them, but at least there are fewer variables to get in my way. I can then target what I do want to attack and know that that's the only thing that is there with me. So I really think that self-talk is a huge component to any performance, especially momentum, because of the fact those variables, again, we want to be able to target what is going to give us the outcome we're looking for. And so if we recognize that our perceptions, our thoughts drive how we feel and what we do, we can pre-plan those. We can pre-program, we can prime ourselves to adjust our energy as necessary. Football, quite often, everyone goes to those big hit videos to get hyped up, right? You have the linebackers smacking helmets like, let's do this. This is our house. We're going, and everyone around them is like hooting and hollering and bouncing, and that's great and all, except most research shows that on average, more than 50% of the people actually have an excessive amount of energy to be in their optimal zone of functioning, and they need to bring that energy down to a stage where they can focus and execute at a high level or to perform their best. So hitting helmets and like getting hyped up is not really going to do it. It goes back to your resilience again. What is your coping? How do I get myself into that zone? Cognitive behavioral thoughts, self-talk is one of those ways. I need to align my thoughts with what I'm going to get on the backside. If I say that, this is my house, this is something that people aren't going to take from me, and that hypes me up, and I need to get hyped up, I'm going to say that because now my energy has gone up. But if I say, you've been here before, you're good at this, you know your job, you feel strong because you are strong. And that allows me to have some confidence, and it allows me to bring my energy down so I can be right in that optimal zone of functioning. That's what I need to do to get to where I need to control those variables and to execute and produce over and over again, so I can get into that flow state, so I can be in a space that allows me to have automaticity and know that, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I expected. And even if I get jolted a little bit, even if I get knocked off my high horse, I don't go on tilt, because I can go back to that baseline again. I can flush the last bad play, or I had the momentum and it got broken. Okay, but it's not a swing. It just got broken. Let's start going back into, I want another gradual buildup of momentum again. Even though you broke my momentum before, maybe it was a fluke, maybe not. But I need to understand how my thoughts are aligning with the outcomes I'm trying to get, and how I can put those into play to succeed more frequently.
Let's finish this up by talking about how being present and experiencing a flow state or being in the zone is a very important ingredient for momentum. And just to start us off here, I think of it as when there is this big momentum shift within a team or individual, they have very effective focus and it's unwavering. So they're focused on the right things and they have that confidence to also maintain the focus. You never see, I imagine, athletes and teams with momentum focused on the wrong things, like dwelling on the past for too long and creating this anger or guilt and frustration, or jumping up to the future and creating this panic or anxiety. That is very rarely seen in these momentum shifts. So being present, would you agree, is a very important ingredient for momentum? And also being present is something everyone is already doing if they're in a flow state. And I imagine there's a lot of flow state being involved with these momentum shifts.
Yeah, I would say you're correct because I mean the concept of flow, studied Csikszentmihalyi, really looking at how people get into flow and what that entails and what are some of the aspects of it. Really breaks down to that you have the exact skill set and requirements necessary to meet the task at hand perfectly. So everything aligns perfectly, and I was made for this task. It comes natural, it becomes automatic, and then it happens over and over and over again. Almost that oscillation of synchronicity, right? It's just continuing. And when people find themselves in that quote unquote flow state, which is again it's difficult. It's a qualitative kind of, people talk about it and they tell you, oh, I was in that. Okay, well, how do you know? What was it like? People have time and space dilation in a sense where they're like, man, that game went so fast. I didn't even know that I scored 50. Like, holy crap, And it just seemed natural. It just kept going. And it's because, again, that task and skill have lined up perfectly. And when that happens, you see, you do. It's almost that simple. And the variables are minimized. I see, I do, wash, rinse, repeat.
It's like almost animalistic. You're not overthinking in any way that relates to the past or the future. You're just seeing and you're doing. You're processing everything as it comes.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's all there is to it. Somebody else put constraints on you. Somebody else put a time clock there, or somebody else put whatever it may be that says, here's the start and stop of this measured performance. But in reality, you find yourself very present in that moment. And all you do is execute what is perceived to be perfectly because you have the skills necessary to meet that task better than your opponent or to the best of your ability to really just prove that you can time and again just keep moving in the way you want. And it's not an easy state to get to. You may be the best player out there and you may not feel like you're in flow all the time. It may feel like it's a slog or you're really digging to, oh man, I scored 50, but I definitely knew every single one of those 50 I scored. The flow states and that being present really allows you to almost float in a sense of where you're at and transcend a little bit of some of those other constructs that you see around you because it's just here and now and in this moment.
Just another reason why doing things to be in the present moment throughout a game is important, because that's where so many of these great performances come from, of being present and not being stuck in the past or jumping to the future.
Yeah. That's why I would say to a question you had earlier, how do you prevent your opponent from, having these massive swings or shifts or anything else? And it's what skills do you have in your back pocket to bring yourself back to the present moment, to really attach to that variable or variables that are necessary to execute the task at hand with your skill development and degree. And the more of those that you can do, the more likely you are to succeed at a higher level and to have positive momentum on your side as opposed to having the negative shift that you can't seem to scramble back from and stop.
Always comes back to being present. Let's wrap up this episode and get to the action items. So again, this is an abstract concept of momentum that we are going to try and give listeners actionable ways to train their ability to gain and sustain momentum and also stave it off when opponents gain momentum. Do you go to any certain type of training right away that you would recommend to listeners?
Oh, I think, and this is for more than just momentum, but I think it really pertains to momentum as well. I just go first and foremost with awareness. Like you have to be in a state of presence, as you were just mentioning. You have to be aware of yourself, those dynamics and variables, and your surroundings and the constraints that are put on you, because we all want to win. We all want to succeed. We all want that change that gets us there. But in reality, you can't self-regulate before you're self-aware. You need to see what change you want to make before you can actually make long-term sustainable change. So I really think that some of the mindfulness, some of the taking time to slow down and figure out what your cognitions are doing, how they're impacting your emotions and your behaviors is a really big first step. Slowing down and really taking that ABC concept of, what is the activating events and, that are really triggering me to have these beliefs and thoughts that are leading me to have these consequence outcomes. If you can start doing that and at any point in time just say, okay, I can look at these things, then you're going to have greater levels of success down the line because you're going to be able to start building that resilience and you're going to be able to start implementing more of those stop gaps that allow you to control the variables within yourself and the things that you may not be able to control fully outside in the situation or scenario, but it does allow you to have some influence over. You may not be able to control the referee or the umpires, but the way that you engage them and approach a situation may influence some of what occurs, which is to your benefit or to your demise. That would be one of my first thoughts with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Something I like saying very often is awareness is the gate you have to go through before you do anything about your mental game. So if you're going to improve something about your self-talk or train your ability to be resilient, that skill of awareness is very important. And awareness goes back to being aware of, am I in a negative facilitation mindset right now? Am I doing everything I can to catch back up and shift momentum to my side? If so, great. If not, how can I get there? And then on the flip side, am I aware of myself in this positive inhibition mindset of I'm getting comfortable, I'm not doing everything I can. Okay, what can I add to my strategy and execution that will make me better? So yeah, awareness is a great first step.
Yeah. And as you're building awareness, I would say one of the, cart before the horse, like what should I do first? What should I do second? I really think routines are a big piece of you can do in conjuncture with each other. Because if you haven't already, you should be identifying what your routines look like in various situations, and you should be finding control over those variables because that's where the negative facilitation is again. You've had your back against a wall. You can't you can't throw the whole kitchen sink at them. You got to really focus on that one aspect of what's going to get you a step ahead. And it's going to move you down the field or across the pitch or whatever that may be. But understanding your routine is a big piece of that because then you can start identifying those variables. You can start doing a little bit more to have control again and put the control where it matters. There was interesting research I saw on individuals who were taking putt shots, and they were from, I don't recall, like 10 or 12 feet away. But they let people just take this shot with the perception of either you are shooting for par or you are shooting for bogey. And the interesting thing was when they aligned it, people shot better when they perceived that they were shooting for bogey because they're already behind the eight ball. They're already like, I'm going to be one down at least, maybe more. So I really have to hone my focus here and what I can control, as opposed to, well, if I don't get par, then, par is great. But people were really able to dial in their focus more, is what most of this research showed. And they were more likely to make the shot if they thought that they were going to do it for bogey than if they thought that they had a little bit more room or a little bit more give to what might happen. So I think that negative facilitation concept again is what can you structure as a routine? What are those variables that you can take control of? And how can you perceive yourself to always be kind of scratching or clawing or trying to play from behind? Because if that narrows your focus in a productive way, then you're going to more likely execute and get the final end result that you want.
Other ways that I think about using a routine in this way is having a routine, a reset routine that you can use throughout a game that once you realize that you're thinking ineffectively or not playing your best, and that's vulnerability for momentum shifts, that's when you can have a way to reset that you can use constantly. And then additionally, something that might be even more important when we talk about momentum is a type of routine when there's a big break. So this could be maybe between shifts, like in hockey, or it could be halftime in football and basketball. What type of routine are you going through that is going to produce the most effective mindset and confidence when you go back onto the court or field that can, again, facilitate positive momentum and reduce negative momentum?
Yeah. And you're completely correct there on thinking about what those routines do and making sure that you avoid superstitions in
Oh,
that
yeah.
sense, because quickly that's where it starts to go sideways, where somebody's like, man, I didn't do this. So now I'm distracted. I added more variables that I'm now thinking about. I'm not in the present moment. It's a superstition if you don't have control over it and it's not something that is working productively for you. If it's just I need these dirty socks on in order to produce and I forgot them today or I washed them on accident, yeah, that's not really going to align your thoughts well.
Yeah, don't get me started on superstitions. So is there another like tool that you think about or a quality of mental performance that you would want athletes to train that leads to these more effective momentum shifts?
um, that's a good question. And
My mind
we
goes to
we we
confidence, like
yeah, I
confidence
really think the confidence
exercises.
is that last buffer piece that goes well with it, and starting to put into play that degree of certainty, yes, but also your source of confidence. Where are you pulling it from? And that's I've been here, done this before. If you can have evidence to prove that, okay, I can give myself more confidence there, that's huge. You always want to get it from your coaches and your teammates and other people. That's great if you can pull it in from them. Quite often, observationally, you just see and you feel a degree of comfort, certainty that you can handle this task. You see your opponents and you're like, man, they're a ragtag bunch, but I don't think that they put in the hours that I put in. Now I'm mixing evidence that I can see that really helps bolster my confidence and certainty. And I'm also, taking this observation to add to it. But I really think that the one controllable factor in that degree of certainty, after you get past the awareness of just recognizing where that spectrum is your self-talk again and starting to prime yourself and your thoughts and aligning those with what's going to get you the outcome. Do I need more energy? Do I need more focus? Do I need to bring it down a little bit? Do I need to have these specific thoughts in mind? That's where you see a lot of people who use music and they're wearing headphones or, they got pods in and they're doing whatever it is because they may be associative or disassociative. Associative, you're focusing on what's going on exactly to control it. Disassociative, I don't want to think about it at all. Let's take that out of my mind and just kind of blank. That way I can not be distracted by these things coming at me. But if you're really targeting confidence, you're trying to find a way to be able to pre-program yourself to be in that present moment the way you want to be in it, so you can reach automaticity, you can get to a level of flow, and you can start seeing the momentum swings work in your favor, or that resilience, as you mentioned before. Something went wrong, I don't know what's happening, I get a chance in between periods or at the half. Okay, now I can reset a little bit. And that can be a cue word I have. Oh, that's my cognitions again. I'm using cue words to tell myself and align what I want to have happen next. If I can do that, my confidence goes up. I get what I anticipated. I have control over it. And I'm more likely to start seeing those variables play out and work for me as opposed to working against me.
Beautiful. This was such a fun conversation. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so thank you for joining me. Before we end it, is there anything else you wanted to add to this conversation on momentum? If not, where could people find you or reach out if they were interested?
Man, I thank you for having me. It was a great topic. I do love talking about it. I mean, the last thing I'll say is that I hope people just keep talking about it and they keep bringing it up, whether you think you get it right or wrong, or you know what momentum is or you don't. Start identifying those things. That's what we need. That's what researchers do. Researchers dig into all those different aspects, and there are a lot of them with this concept of momentum. So even if you don't feel like you're educated in that realm, or you don't have as much understanding of it, so what? Jump in, start conceptualizing it for yourself, start creating examples, and start trying them on for size and see what other people think when you bring that up. That's what I would say. And then, tell me what you found. Hopefully you'll share some of my contact information with anybody who'd like to reach out to me. I'm always down to talk shop or to be a support in our field. I think that our field, is stable and it's been there for a while, but we are really expanding and growing still. And whether you've been in the field, for decades, or whether you're brand new to the field, we can all share with each other. We can all gain and grow, and we can develop together and make our field stronger. So if anybody's interested in reaching out to me, I'm always down to talk and to hear and to help and to learn as well. So I appreciate you having me here today and getting a chance to do just that.
Yeah, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Take care, Gabe.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you took something valuable away from this episode. Stay in the loop by following the Sports Psychology of on your go-to podcast platform, and find clips of each episode's best segments on YouTube, as well as Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Do you want to take your mental game to the next level? Try out one-on-one sports psychology coaching with me, Gabe Zellico, by visiting my website, zellicoperformance.com. You can book a free intro call where we'll discuss your goals, obstacles to success, and determine if we'd be a good fit to move forward. You can also email me directly at thesportspsychology@gmail.com regarding one-on-one coaching or the podcast. Links to social media, my website, and email are all in the description. Thank you again for listening.